I found a passage in my journal that I'd almost forgotten about. I'd written it years before I ever read the Bible. And when I read it again, I just froze. Because in those lines, I was talking about a voice that accused me whenever I did something I knew wasn't right. Back then, I believed that voice was the devil. I kept trying to silence it. I'd come up with explanations. I'd make excuses. Years later, I would discover that I'd completely misunderstood that voice. Long before I ever read the Bible, there was already a voice following me. Whenever I did something I knew wasn't right, it would appear. It showed me there was a right path, one I didn't want to take. And in the journal I read again years later, I found these words that I'd written back then. The way the devil judges is by judging me harshly whenever I do something wrong. He always makes me think. He's always right, but without compassion. My answers to him should be, I don't care. Who cares? So what? Those words described exactly the battle I was fighting inside. That voice would show up in the most ordinary moments. If I refused to help someone, it would ask me, what if you were the one person who could have helped them? If I lied, I knew it was wrong. If I hated someone, I knew it was wrong. If I wanted revenge, I knew it was wrong. But I always had an answer. I'd come up with explanations. I'd come up with justifications. Looking back now, I realized something I couldn't see then. That voice wasn't the problem. The problem was that I was always trying to silence it. The first time I opened the Bible, it wasn't because I was looking for God. I did it for myself. I wanted to become more disciplined, wiser, a better person. I'd heard people like Jim Rohn talk about the Bible as a book full of principles. I thought maybe I could learn something useful from it. My cousin had given me a Bible as a gift back in 2020. So I started reading. I got to Genesis, and I stopped. I tried again. I stopped again. I just didn't understand it. It seemed boring to me, and I didn't like the God I thought I was seeing there. He was exactly how I described him in the previous episodes. A harsh God, a dictator, a tyrant. Looking back on that time now, I see something different. The problem wasn't the Bible. The problem was that I was trying to understand God's character without actually knowing him. After my conversation with my Muslim coworker, something changed. Now I wanted to find out whether it was true. I wasn't reading the Bible anymore just because I hoped it would help me in life. My parents told me something very simple. They said it was difficult to start with the Old Testament, and that it would be better to read the New Testament first. So I started with Matthew. The first few lines were just a list of names. Honestly, it didn't interest me at all. But this time, something happened that I'd never done before. I didn't stop. Sometimes I'd read a whole chapter. Other times, just a few verses. But I read every day. Without even realizing it, the Bible had become part of my daily routine. Every evening, after 7 o'clock, I'd sit on the couch by the window in the living room. I'd read the Bible, then I'd smoke a cigarette right there by the window. After that, I'd keep reading. And without anyone telling me anything, I started to feel that something wasn't right. No one had told me it was a sin. I just felt that I couldn't treat the Word of God like any other book anymore. just as I wouldn't smoke in front of my parents out of respect for them, I began to feel that same respect toward God. It wasn't a rule. It was something that had changed inside me. For almost everything I did wrong, I had an explanation. If I did something I knew wasn't right, I'd always find a reason. It's not that bad. Everyone does it. I'll change later. I have my reasons. There was always a justification. The problem wasn't that I didn't know the difference between right and wrong. In many situations, I did. But I was able to convince myself that I didn't need to change anything. I was my own lawyer. Whenever I was accused, I immediately started building my defense. I'd come up with circumstances. I'd make comparisons. I'd find reasons why it wasn't really my fault. And for a while, it worked. I managed to quiet my conscience. But the Bible was doing something I could never do on my own. Little by little, it took away every one of my arguments. Not because it only wanted to condemn me, but because it was showing me the truth I had been trying to avoid. My whole life, I'd always found explanations. For the first time, I was no longer my own lawyer. As I reread my journals, I discovered something I'd completely forgotten. Back then, I used to say that I wanted to believe in God, but the God I claimed to believe in wasn't the God of the Bible. I believed in the law of attraction. I believed in the universe. I believed in all kinds of ideas. I would say God, but I didn't know who he was. I didn't know his character. I didn't know what he loves. I didn't know what he hates. I didn't know him. Now I can see that God was at work in my life long before I knew him. I kept turning my back on him. I'd make excuses. I kept trying to silence the truth I already knew. But he never abandoned me. I used to think the problem was that voice in my head. I thought it was only trying to make me feel guilty. Every time I did something I knew wasn't right, I tried to silence it. I'd tell myself, it doesn't matter. It's not that serious. Everyone does it. Today, I see those moments differently. Today, I believe God was bringing to light the things I was trying to hide. Not to condemn me, but to call me. And that's when I understood why I needed Jesus. Not because I was worse than everyone else, but because when I was honest with myself, I realized I needed forgiveness and change. Today, I'm thankful to God that voice never went silent. Because if it had, I probably never would have sought him.